Let's turn to our text found in the book of Galatians. Now, concerning this message, I would rather be talking about something pleasant, something nice, and something which you might call more on the positive side, but this is all part of the Word of God also. Amen. Galatians chapter 6, verse number 7. This is a universal law. This verse is divided up into three different statements. First, there's three words and a semicolon. And then there's four words and a colon. And then the last thought. I'd like for us to read this verse together, everyone together. Amen. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. My question. Paul says, for whatsoever a man soweth. Does this apply to women? Yeah. Okay. Does it apply to nations? Yes. Now, how is God mocked? First of all, he gives a warning. Be not deceived. Because it's possible to mock God. Amen. Yeah. But what does it mean to mock God? If your mother, you were a child, and your mother came to you, or your father came to you and said, do not play in the street. You remember those days? Do not play in the street. Do not ride your bicycle in the street. You got on your bicycle and you rode out in the street. That's mocking your parent. It's you mock God by disobeying what He told us to do or not to do. But the apostle starts out this way. Be not deceived. Don't kid yourself. Yeah. There's consequences to mocking God. Amen. For whatsoever a man sows, yes, that shall he also reap. That's a universal law. Yep. Exodus chapter 20. Verse number 1, God spake all these words to Moses, Exodus 20. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of bondage. Thou shalt have no other God before me. That's fourth grade language. That's pretty clear. There's no misunderstanding there. No lawyer language there. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or likeness of anything that is in heaven above, earth beneath, or water, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, and here we go, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. But I'm going to change that word to mock. Yeah. Same thing. Same meaning. So there is consequences that are reaped by a succeeding generation because of the iniquity or sin or the mocking of the previous generation. Absolutely. And he says it's upon the third and the fourth generation. Now, I'm going to try to stay on track here because there's a lot of detours that I could take. But let's turn to Isaiah chapter 14. Isaiah 14, verse 21. 14:21. Prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers. Prepare slaughter for the children, for the iniquity of the fathers. And 65:7 in this same book. Your iniquities and the iniquities of your fathers together. So there's the father generation with iniquities, and then there's the son, the succeeding generation with iniquities, and combine them together, and you have an angry God that's going to repay that generation. Also, in Amos chapter 9, verse 8, the Lord is speaking to northern Israel, a wicked generation. But here we see a real wonderful, we see a dark and we see a light principle here. Amos 9:8, behold, the eyes of the Lord God are upon the sinful kingdom. This was Israel. And I will destroy it from off the face of the earth. The kingdom was the social structure, the body politic of the nation of Israel, and he said, I'm going to destroy it from off the face of the earth. Saving, or except that I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob or the family of Jacob. Amen. He destroyed the kingdom and saved the people. Amen. Yes. There's the light part. There's the hope. For lo, I will command and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve, yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. Let's go back to the book of Exodus. Exodus 34, verse number 7. It says, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children. Now we've reached the third generation, unto the third and to the fourth generation. What our national fathers have sown in iniquity, we are reaping today. Amen. The corruption that we see in Washington, D.C. today is not the worst part. It didn't start yesterday or 4 years ago. It didn't start 8 years ago. It didn't start 16 years ago. It started decades ago, and we are reaping the consequences of the iniquities of our national fathers. Now, we want to go to the book of Deuteronomy. And I want to move along rather quickly. Deuteronomy chapter 28. Deuteronomy 28, we all know, is the chapter of blessing and cursings. I'm going to start at verse number 30. Can't cover it all, but I'm going to start at number 30. Thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Now, how do we interpret all these things? I interpret this, or the implication is, a high rate of divorce.
Yes. Amen.
Thou shalt build an house, thou shalt not dwell therein. How do we interpret that? Tax bondage.
Yep.
You build a house and you lose it.
Yeah.
Through default of mortgage
Yes.
or the courthouse steps. You just don't pay your ad valorem tax and you're in problem. You have a problem.
Yes.
And it's all prophesied here in the book of cursings. Thou shalt not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and thou shalt not gather the grapes thereof. It could be pestilence. It could be famine. It could be flood. Thine ox shall be slain before thine eyes, and thou shalt not eat thereof. Thine ass shall be violently taken away from thy face, and shall not be restored to thee. Thy sheep shall be given unto thine enemies, and thou shalt have none to rescue them. Then it says in verse number 32, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people. They shall be filled with leaven.
Yeah. Exactly.
Their minds shall be polluted.
Yes.
Yes.
Their hearts, their intentions, their desires shall be perverted. They run after the heathen. They run after the corruption
Yes.
that is pumped into our lives through many different means. And we lose them. We can't touch them. Is this the child that I've raised?
Amen. Amen.
Hello?
Hallelujah.
Are these the children
Yes.
that sat at my table
Amen.
and I fed them?
Mhm.
Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people. The college professors, etc. And thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long. How am I going to get my children back? Is what he's saying.
Yes.
And there shall be no might in thy hand. Parents stand there helpless. The children have been taken captive
Yes.
by another force. The corrupt educational system or whatever it may be. The fruit of thy land, the fruit of thy land, and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up. Boy, that's a sermon there.
Yes.
That's right.
Foreigners actually seeing the bounty of the blessing of Israel, and they want to take it away. Thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed away, so that thou shalt be mad for the sight of thine eyes. I think he's right.
Yeah.
Which thou shalt see. The Lord shall smite thee in the knees, in the legs. Disease is what he's talking about.
Yes.
The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known. And there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. And it goes on and on. And in verse number 41, thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. And then, 43, the stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you're going to be the tail. These things are self-explanatory. because we see them in 4-color before us.
Yep. Absolutely.
We live it every day. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter number 7, in the Old Testament, we know the story how Israel was given the promise of the Canaan land. Moses died. Joshua was the man. He was the leader to take the children of Israel over the Jordan, come west, and possess Canaan land. And in Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse number 1, Moses is giving the laws of conquest. He's giving them the laws of conquest. Israel's going to send their men over across Jordan and conquer this land. And this is what he says. When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess, and cast out many nations, that's Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Termites, Jebusites, the 7 nations greater and mightier than thou, when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them. Boom. Make no covenant with them.
Amen.
Now, we know that we're not sending an army over to possess a land in like they did in ancient Israel, to possess it. The nations are already established. We're in our land. There's these other sovereign nations around us. And Moses said, do not make a league or a covenant with them.
Amen.
Neither shalt thou make marriages with them, because these covenants eventually lead to marriage with foreign nations. Because your sons began to look at the girls over there and vice versa, and it's just a natural thing. So the Lord gave common sense laws, but they are divine commands. Number 1, don't make covenants with other nations, Israel, and don't intermarry. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son. This is also on a 4th grade level.
Amen.
It's plain. Nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son, because there are consequences. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Oh, well, we can get by with little Pearly Lou over there. She's just as beautiful as can be, with those dark eyes, black hair, and etc. But God says don't do it, because there's consequences. For they shall turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. You see, interracial blood leads to interracial gods.
Amen.
Religious pluralism. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you and destroy you suddenly. For thus shall ye deal with them. You shall destroy their altars, break down their images, their groves, and burn their graven images with fire, for thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. It doesn't say thou art a holy people, period.
Amen.
It says thou art a holy people, or a separated people unto God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. Now, the Lord gave these 2 laws of conquest. Don't allow yourself to enter into any kind of a league or covenant with foreign nations. And don't mix your blood with the people of foreign nations. Now, in the book of Joshua, I'm trying to move on quickly. Israel, under the leadership of Joshua, has crossed the Jordan River and they conquered the city of Jericho. So, they're going out to another battle, the city of Ai. And in Joshua chapter 6, this is what he says. Verse number 7. And the city shall be accursed, even it and all that are therein to the Lord, even Rahab, this is talking about Jericho. The harlot shall live, and all that are in her house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. And then he gives a command, and ye in any wise keep yourself from the accursed thing. Lest ye make yourself accursed, and make the camp of Israel a curse and trouble it. Now, he figured that he could steal something. He could make, and I'm going to use this term, a profit off of war. Does that ring a bell with anybody? He's going to make a profit off of war. In the midst of the war, and he admitted, I coveted them, and I took them, and I hid them. This is the way I want to apply this message today. Achan owns these things: the garment, the silver, and the gold. But when the army of Israel, and he took them back and he hid them in his tent. And then the second battle, they're going out to conquer the city of Ai. And the Bible tells us that when they went against the army of Ai, that Israel was defeated, and 3,000 men, and they fled before the men of Ai. Now, one man committed the sin, and 3,000 suffered the consequences. So, when men who are greedy, men who are covetous, when they make money off of another man's blood, the whole camp suffers.
Amen.
And the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing.
Amen.
And the anger of the Lord was kindled against the children of Israel. That's 7:1 of Joshua. Because there are just wars and unjust wars. There are wars of defense and wars of offense. And Achan figured, well, the Lord is with us. We are conquering. We're the greater power. Israel was the greater military power over Jericho, and they won. But at the meantime, somebody named Achan had to steal that which was, God called it, accursed. Making money off of war. Folks, it's happened in every war that the United States has ever engaged in. Serious money. Especially, we're more acquainted with Vietnam and the following wars because we're living in this time period. You see, war is a rich man's game and a poor man's fight. So when Israel went out to fight against Ai, the whole nation lost. Not just Achan. But Achan had to pay the consequences because he was slain. He was stoned to death with his family. Now, war during wartime is the perfect time to covet. It's the perfect circumstances. Folks, I don't want to give, you know the news as well as I do.
Yes.
So I'm trying to just stay with the principles
Amen.
without giving so many vivid examples, because we all know the vivid examples. But greed in the camp of Israel in a war of victory led to a defeat against a lesser power in the next war.
Yes.
Why can't we win in Afghanistan? We've been there 16 years.
Really?
What are we fighting with? Bow and arrows? Because God says, be not deceived.
Amen.
You have overstepped your bounds, America.
Yes.
You have overstepped your bounds with all your military prowess.
Yes.
You are weak.
Amen.
Weak in leadership. Because you've won in the past, and the Bible tells us in another place, when you win, you give God the glory, but we have failed to give Him the glory.
Amen.
And therefore, when we go up against our AIs, who are lesser nations than us, we cannot win. And I don't want to go too deep into this, but really, we not only fight illegal wars, we start wars.
Amen.
And we've been doing it for well over 60 years.
Yes.
We foment wars.
Yep.
And men, greedy industrialists, come out multi-billionaires.
Yep.
That is the spirit of Achan,
Amen.
making gold and silver off of the blood of the men in the trenches. Now, let's move on to another example. In Joshua chapter 9, verse number 1. I'm going to have to read several verses here to get the big picture. 9:1. And it came to pass, when all the kings which were on this side Jordan, and the hills and the valleys, and all the coast of the great sea over against Lebanon, Hittites, Amorites, and so forth, that they gathered themselves together to fight with Joshua and with Israel in one accord. So here's a confederation of heathen nations, and they're coming against Israel and Joshua's leadership. And when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that Joshua had done unto Jericho and to Ai, because they did eventually, in the second battle, win Ai, they did work willily, these men of Gibeon, and went and made as if they had been ambassadors, and took old sacks upon their asses, wine bottles old and rent and bound up, and old shoes, and clouded upon their feet, and old garments upon them, and all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua unto the camp at Gilgal, and said unto him and to the men of Israel, we be come from a far country. Now therefore make us a league with you. Now make ye a league with us. And the men of Israel said unto the Hivites, peradventure ye dwell among us, and how shall we make a league with you? And they said unto Joshua, we are thy servants. And Joshua said unto them, who are ye? And from whence did you come? And they said unto him, From a far country thy servants are come because of the name of the Lord thy God. They knew exactly what to say. For we have heard the fame of him and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites that were beyond Jordan, to Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, and Ashtaroth. Wherefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spake to us, saying, Take victuals with you for the journey, and to meet them, and say unto them, We are your servants. Now we know that this is a big con game. Wherefore now make ye a league with us. This our bread we took hot for our provision out of our houses on the way we came forth unto you, but now it's dry, it's moldy, and these bottles of wine were new, and behold, they be rent, and these our garments and our shoes are become old by reason of the very long journey. And the men took of their victuals, and what's the next statement? And asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord. That's the crux of the matter. So you have these men of Gibeon who are deceivers. They didn't come that far, they just pretended. And they came to Joshua. Now Joshua had been told by Moses, don't make a covenant.
Amen.
But he saw the pretended destitution of these people and their poor plight, and we must help them. So we must enter a league unto them. Well, you know the goods are going to flow only in one direction.
That's right.
And they did not consult the Lord. Why didn't Joshua, as wise as he was, and he had just heard the words of Moses a matter of a few years before or less, he just said, Oh, we'll help you. That's no problem. We have a lot of wine and bread and resources. We'll help you. And Joshua made peace with them and made a league with them to let them live, and the princes of the congregation swear unto them. Now, verse number 18, that's where we come in. And the children of Israel smote them not, because who was it? The princes of the congregation had sworn unto them by the Lord, but the congregation murmured about it.
Yep.
That's us.
Yeah. Amen.
The people saw through the fraud,
Amen.
Yes.
Yes.
but the princes are the ones that obligated the whole nation to enter into this league. But the people said, Hey, this is not wise. This is not smart. You know, So what we'll do with these people, the people were obligated to follow the league or the covenant of the leaders. So the leadership said, well, what we'll do, we'll hire these people to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. We will put them on national payroll.
Yeah.
Government job.
Now, is this Bible or not?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it is.
You see, God is not mocked.
That's right.
Amen.
Amen.
He knew what he was talking about when he said, do not enter in to covenant or league with foreign nations.
Amen.
Now, it would be easier this morning if we just talked about lowly Jesus. But folks, I'm concerned
Amen.
about a nation
Yes, sir.
once the greatest on the planet
Yep.
is now ruled by the oligarchy
Yes.
and the criminals
Yes.
and the matoid's in between.
Yeah.
A matoid is one that's on the very verge of insanity. He's just right on the edge.
Yes. Yes.
Good description.
These Gibeonites, they were sharp in their dealings with the leadership of Israel. Joshua and the other leadership, they knew better.
Yes. Yes.
They had a law that said, don't do this. But as verse 14 says, the men took of their victuals and asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord. So they had the battle. All this confederation of nations against Israel. This league obligated Israel to protect the Gibeonites in war. Now I'm going to make a parallel example here real quick. What nation on the planet today has obligated America to fight its wars for them? So when you go to war, Joshua, and you fight this confederation of heathen nations, we're on your side. You'll fight our wars. You'll spill your blood to protect us Gibeonites. That sound familiar? We all know. It's the modern Zionist state of Israel. We shed our blood. Why? Because we have made a league, a covenant with them, without consulting the counsel of the Lord.
Yes.
And who says that the law is done away with?
Yeah.
Seems like to me the principles are still in effect. The principles of law are still in effect.
Amen.
Now, we go to the book of 2 Samuel. As far as the timeline, we're going to run the videotape forward several years. From the time of Joshua to the time of David. At least 300 years. Because this is in Joshua's day when he conquered the land, we'll say that was approximately 1400 BC. David took the throne in approximately 1050 BC. So we're talking at least 300 years when Joshua made that league with the Gibeonites. So we come to 2 Samuel chapter 21. And King David is now on the throne. I want you to get this picture. King David, we know the story. Saul, the story of Saul. Samuel said, "You want a king, Israel? I'll give you a king. He's going to be a brute. He's going to take your sons and your daughters and he's going to make them work for his benefit.
Yep.
He'll put them in his vineyards and in his bakeries and in his agricultural industry, He will do all this, and He'll make a lot of your sons chariot drivers, and you'll be working for Him. And Saul, as we all know, turned out to be a man that he was brutal sometimes with his enemies. And Saul dies. David takes the throne and he rules Judah from the city of Hebron for 7.5 years. And the men of Israel come to him and say, the northern tribes, we are bone of your bone and flesh of your flesh. We want you to rule over us also. Reunite the kingdom, Israel and Judah, back together. So David is ruling over a reunited Israel kingdom. And in the process of time, we come to 2 Samuel chapter 21. And there was a famine in the days of David 3 years, 3 consecutive years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord and said, Lord, why are we having this famine? And God gave him an answer. It is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. 300 years before, 300 plus years before, Joshua made a league with the Gibeonites. And that league was still binding 300 years later. And now there was an actual physical, natural results. No rain. No rain for 3 years. David didn't ask the Lord about it the first year or the second year, but he asked about him the reason the third year. And the Lord answered him and said, guess what, David? You and your people are suffering or enduring this famine because of what Saul did several years before. Possibly maybe 10 years before or 20 years before. What he did to the Gibeonites, and it doesn't give us, the Scriptures doesn't give us an account of what he did other than this statement right here, that he went in and he brutally murdered non-covenant people. Have we done that as America? What happened in Vietnam? What's happening in the Middle East? We are still killing people, non-covenant people. Why? We entered into a league with them unlawfully, but God is holding us responsible.
Amen.
You see that? God is holding our nation responsible. So we not only have famine in certain parts, the Panhandle hasn't had rain in over 90 days. We have drought. We have fires. We have tornadoes, hurricanes, heat wave, snowstorms. They called a bomb. Earthquakes. So does God repay the sins of the fathers to the succeeding generations through natural means. This verse right here pretty well tells us. A famine for 3 years, a godly man on the throne. He seeks the Lord and says, what is wrong? Why are we having this famine? And God said, it's because of something your predecessor did, not what you did. So a nation suffers the consequences of national decisions of previous generations. You know, folks, actually, this Korean conflict, we're suffering that, we're going through that because it wasn't settled in 1952.
That's right. Amen.
Verse number 2, and the king called the Gibeonites and said unto them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel. This is 2 Samuel 21:2. The Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. They were part of the Canaanites. And the children of Israel had sworn unto them. You catch that statement? Made a league with them, with Joshua, 300 years before. And the children of Israel had sworn unto them, and Saul sought to slay them in his zeal to the children of Israel and Judah. He overstepped his bounds in war. I have a few more minutes here. 2 Kings 21. Second Kings 21. I'm going to have to read several verses, and it explains the setting. 2 Kings 21. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. He did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, after the abomination of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. Jeremiah says this, learn not the ways of the heathen. Verse 3, for he built up again the high places which Hezekiah his father had destroyed. He reared up altars for Baal and made a grove, as did Ahab king of Israel, and worshipped all the host of heaven. He built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord said, in Jerusalem will be my name. He built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord, and he made his son pass through the fire, observed times, enchantments, familiar spirits, wizards, and he wrought much wickedness in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. And he set a graven image of the grove that he had made in the house that the Lord said to David and to Solomon, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen, out of all the tribes of Israel will I put my name forever. Neither will I make the feet of Israel move any more out of the land which I gave their fathers, only if they will observe to do according to all that I have commanded them, and according to all the law, according to my servant Moses. And they hearkened not, and Manasseh seduced them to do more evil than the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the children of Israel. Now, we come down to verse 16. Moreover, Manasseh shed innocent blood
Yes.
very much till he had filled Jerusalem from end to end. Innocent blood. The blood of those who could not help themselves, could not resist. So the first principle we talked about is making money, becoming rich off of war. God hates it. Number two, making marriages with non-Israelites. Number three, making leagues or covenants and never consulting the Lord. And now, killing the innocent. What might you think that would be?
Yes.
Aborticide.
Yep.
Human aborticide.
Yep.
Which boils down to murder.
Yes.
So, the story goes on. That's the epitaph of the administration of Manasseh. So we come along in this story to chapter 22. And without reading chapter 22, Josiah takes the throne, a godly young man. He destroys all these idols. He tears down the high places. He eradicates the houses, all the bawdy houses in the land, and the houses of the prostitutes, and all the houses of the sodomites. He destroys them. And you would think that God would wipe the slate clean. He didn't. We find in 2 Kings 22, verse number 18, hold of the prophet, got a message from the Lord, and took to Josiah. And this is what he said in verse 19. Because thine heart was tender, and thou hast humbled thyself before the Lord, when thou heardest what I spake against this place and against the inhabitants thereof, that they should become a desolation and a curse, and hath rent thy clothes, and you wept before me, I also have heard thee. Behold, therefore, I will gather thee unto thy fathers, and thou shalt be gathered into thy grave in peace. And thine eyes shall not see all the evil which I will bring upon this place. God preserved the righteous, but destroyed Jerusalem. In other words, you would think, well, here's a king on the throne. He got rid of all the outward signs, indications of evil in the heart. He cleaned up the land. And you would think, well, the slate is clean now. God's not going to judge Jerusalem. He let Josiah die in peace.
Yes.
But he said, my vengeance is still hot
Yes.
because of the previous administration. My application is this. Now, we talked about war, we talked about money, we talked about league, now we're down to abortion. My personal opinion is that if abortion was outlawed and eradicated tomorrow morning throughout the land,
Yes.
we would still suffer the
Amen.
consequences
Amen.
of the previous generations.
Amen. Amen.
God is not going to forget the
Yes.
innocent blood.
Amen.
This nation needs a revival. Yes, I believe a genuine revival is coming. And it's not going to be one that some preacher makes a lot of money off of,
Amen.
or starts a new ministry or college, or builds an empire. We don't need that anymore.
Amen.
God is going to save the righteous,
Hallelujah.
but He's going to judge the United States of America
Amen.
body politic.
Amen. Amen.
Look how evil we've been.
Yes.
The rubbish that is being put out for entertainment. The perversion that has captured the minds of our children that we read earlier in Deuteronomy. God will spare the righteous, but He's going to judge this nation. The California fires, that's just a matchstick compared to what God can do. And our troubles with the Islamic people and the radicals, etc. He said, I'll bring a nation against you that you never knew.
Yes.
But we're too dull, too thick,
Amen.
and our leadership counsels not with the Lord. But we want to be a David and say, Lord, what's wrong? What's wrong? We want to inquire of the Lord.
Yes.
And He's given us the answer in the book. It's the sins of the fathers and the present generation.
Yes.
And I'm going to judge you for it. Well, let me read you one verse and I'll close. It's in here somewhere. Proverbs 29:2. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. That word mourn, I'm going to use to describe the turmoil that is in this nation. All the way from the Capitol in D.C. all the way down to the streets. These riots, these college students, all the rest of them, the people are mourning. Is one man going to solve it all? No. Because we've got decades of history that we're suffering from.
Yes.
Decades of history. Joshua, you made a mistake. You put every leadership in Israel after you in a binding obligation to protect the Gibeonites. Saul violated that. And in the reign of David, there was a famine. So we do suffer as a nation for the iniquity of our fathers. So let's be righteous before the Lord, walk soft, keep out the leaven, keep it out, and let's watch the Almighty God do His work.
Amen.